"Dance with me," Jonathan Hale said, holding out his hand to the black girl sitting alone beside the emergency exit. For a moment, Annie Brooks thought he must be speaking to someone. Then she looked up and found Jonathan Hale still standing beside her table, waiting. She recognized his face. Everyone in Belhaven did. His name appeared on hospital wings, university laboratories, and one of the largest brass plaques near the entrance to the Belhaven Renewal Foundation. Annie tightened her grip on the strap of her handbag. "Why would someone like you ask me to dance? You don't even know me. I don't intend to stand by while they deliberately isolate you from the rest of this gala." A faint smile touched Jonathan's mouth as his eyes swept across the wealthy guests holding champagne glasses a few yards away. "Mr. Hale," Annie said quietly, "I don't think this is a good idea. Neither do most of the people watching us." A woman in a silver evening gown leaned toward her husband without lowering her voice enough. "Is he serious?" Her husband glanced at Annie. Jonathan has always enjoyed making a point. Near the stage, 2 members of the foundation's board had stopped speaking. "He's embarrassing Charles," one murmured. "No," the other replied. "He's making sure Charles knows he saw what they did." Even the young server beside the coffee station had paused with a silver pot in his hand. "Keep pouring," an older waiter whispered to him. "I'm trying." "Then stop staring." Jonathan did not look at any of them. "That doesn't make me feel any better," Annie said. "It wasn't meant to." His hand remained extended. "What are you waiting for?" he asked. "Do you want them to spend the rest of the evening watching you shake in a forgotten corner beside an exit sign?" "I'm not shaking." "Good. Then prove it somewhere they can see you." Annie looked toward the stage. Charles Whitmore stood beneath the blue and gold banner of the Belhaven Renewal Foundation. Beside him stood Police Commissioner Frank Dalton, broad-shouldered and watchful. But the man standing before her seemed completely unaware of everything around him. Whitmore met Annie's eyes. He did not look surprised to see her alone. He looked irritated that Jonathan had noticed. Whispers moved through the ballroom. "Is that Daniel Brooks's daughter? I heard she submitted his photographs as her own. Jonathan should know better. That family has caused enough trouble." Annie heard every word. She looked down at the hand still waiting in front of her. If she accepted, they would say she wanted attention. If she refused, they would call her bitter, unstable, or ungrateful. Every choice she made in this room had already been assigned an explanation by someone else. For 6 months, strangers had debated what kind of man her father had been. Tonight, they had decided what kind of girl she was. Annie stood. "I'm not very good at this," she said. "Neither am I. And you should know that people tend to get into trouble when they stand too close to me. It will seem less troubling once you see how badly I dance." The way he said it almost made her smile. She placed her hand in his. "Then I hope you'll be patient with me." A fork struck a plate. Someone coughed near the bar. The 3-piece jazz band continued playing because experienced musicians understood that stopping would only make a scene larger. Jonathan led Annie onto the dance floor without gripping her hand too tightly. He did not parade her before the crowd or wrap a protective arm around her. When they reached the center, he left enough space between them for her to decide how close she wished to stand. "Why are you doing this?" Annie asked. Jonathan's gaze dropped to the old camera hanging against her dress. "The way you hold a camera, the way you rise onto your toes when you're searching for the light, even the way you bite your lower lip when you're angry." He looked at her more closely. "Daniel Brooks did all 3 when he cornered me for an interview 15 years ago." Annie's voice rose before she could stop it. "You knew my father?" Only the 2 of them could hear her over the music. Jonathan nodded. "More than you might expect. And don't look so surprised. I recognize the Leica M3 around your neck. There's a scratch beside the viewfinder." Annie touched the mark with one finger. "I watched Daniel use that camera to take my photograph when my company didn't have a proper office," Jonathan continued. "We were working above a hardware store, and the heat had gone out. You recognized me because of this camera?" "I recognized the camera first. It belonged to my father." "I know." Annie's body tightened. Jonathan guided her through a slow turn. Around them, donors and board members pretended not to watch. "He interviewed me years ago," Jonathan said. "Or rather, he interrogated me while pretending it was an interview. He asked questions my board hoped he would never think to ask. That sounds like him. He was difficult." "That also sounds like him." "He was difficult," Jonathan repeated. "But he was fair." The word struck Annie harder than she expected. Fair. For 6 months, people had called Daniel Brooks dishonest, reckless, desperate and corrupt. No one with anything to lose had called him fair. Jonathan waited until they had passed the nearest tables before speaking again. 3 days before your father died, he sent me a message. Annie missed half a step. Jonathan steadied her without making the movement obvious. What message? He said he had found evidence connected to the foundation. He believed someone was moving reconstruction money through shell companies. Why would he tell you? Because part of that money came from me. And because he thought I might still care where it went. Did you answer him? No. The honesty of it stopped Annie's next question. Jonathan's jaw tightened before he continued. I was in London. I saw the message after the crash. By the time I came back, his darkroom had been searched. His files were gone, and everyone who praised him at his funeral had started explaining why they had never trusted him. The musicians moved into the softer middle passage of the song. Annie could feel Charles Whitmore watching from the stage. 6 months earlier, many of the people in this ballroom had stood at Daniel's memorial and spoken about his courage. Then anonymous documents had appeared. The dead could not defend their reputations. Their children were expected to survive whatever remained. What exactly did my father write? Annie asked. Jonathan looked directly at her. He said, if anything happens to me, find roll 18. The words seemed to shrink the ballroom around them. Annie spoke with suspicion in her voice. 3 weeks ago, someone broke into my apartment. They didn't take anything, not even the money I had left out. But every box of film in my darkroom had been opened. Annie looked past Jonathan toward the empty space on the gallery wall where her photographs should have been displayed. They were only able to take a few photographs and they didn't find what they were looking for, because I always keep it close to me. One of those missing photographs had been mounted in a black wooden frame. Behind it, beneath the backing paper, Annie had hidden an envelope marked with the number 18. What if the crash wasn't an accident? She asked. Jonathan did not offer comfort. He did not promise that everything would be all right. He simply said, that is what I came here to find out. The final note of the song lingered beneath the chandeliers, but Jonathan did not release Annie's hand at once. He waited until she recovered her balance, then stepped back as though nothing unusual had passed between them. Does anyone else know about the message? She asked. Not as far as I know. You kept it from me for 6 months? A muscle moved in Jonathan's neck. I kept telling myself the police knew more than I did. You trusted them? I wanted to. Trust and wishful thinking are not the same thing. No, they aren't. His admission, offered without excuse, irritated her more than a polished defense might have. You could have called me. A man with your resources could have found my address in 5 minutes. Yes, I could have, but you didn't. Annie cut him off. You stood by while they buried my father's reputation for half a year. I'm sorry. She folded her arms and stared at the man who was old enough to be her father. Don't apologize to me. We don't know each other. Tell me why you chose to stay silent until tonight. Jonathan glanced toward the stage, where Charles Whitmore was speaking with one of the hotel managers. Because part of the money Daniel was investigating came from me, he said. If the foundation was corrupt, then my donations helped make it look legitimate. My company's name was printed in its reports. My face appeared in its advertisements. I told myself I needed proof before making an accusation. And while you waited, they turned my father into a traitor. I know. They erased his name from the record. They destroyed a career he spent his entire life building. Jonathan did not look away. I followed every story they published about him. Annie gave a bitter laugh. Don't stand there wearing that understanding expression. Your silence was a respectable form of complicity. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Annie. If you can feel Annie's pain as she fights to restore her father's name, please take a moment to like this video. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. There may be someone near you listening to Annie's story at this very moment. Then what do you want? A chance to play the rescuer in the middle of this expensive room? One chance. To do what? To help you find roll 18, the evidence your father risked his life to protect before those people erase it for good. Before Annie could answer, Charles Whitmore appeared at the edge of the dance floor. He carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to owning every room he entered. His chin raised just enough to make condescension look like courtesy. Jonathan, he said, wearing a perfect smile over empty eyes. You certainly know how to give people something to discuss. I thought the foundation encouraged community engagement. Jonathan replied. Not carefully arranged isolation. Whitmore's gaze shifted to Annie. Miss Brooks. I hope you understand that tonight's seating arrangement was not intended as a personal statement. Annie nodded toward the lonely table beside the emergency exit. 7 empty chairs and one place setting feel fairly personal. Are you calling that a coincidence? There were last-minute adjustments. To the seating chart or to my exhibition, Whitmore's expression remained smooth. The curatorial committee raised concerns about ownership and proper attribution. They discovered those concerns this afternoon? I do not manage the exhibition schedule. You chair the foundation. I chair its board. That does not mean I interfere in every minor administrative decision. Jonathan's mouth tilted, a convenient division of responsibility. Whitmore ignored him and turned his full attention to Annie. Miss Brooks, grief can distort the way people interpret difficult events. You should not allow anyone to exploit your pain by encouraging harmful suspicions. Anger rose in Annie's chest. For 6 months, reporters and officials had described her as emotional whenever she corrected them, defensive whenever she requested evidence, and unstable whenever she refused to accept their version of her father. I'm standing right here, she said. You don't need to discuss my state of mind with someone else as though I'm invisible. I had no intention of offending you. No, you intended to sound concerned while suggesting that I can't be trusted. Whitmore's eyes dropped to the Leica hanging against her chest. For a fraction of a second, his composure faltered. It was not guilt. It was the sharpened attention of a hunter who had recognized something he had been searching for. Then the expression vanished. I hope the rest of your evening proves less upsetting, he said. He turned before Annie could answer and joined Police Commissioner Frank Dalton near the stage. Jonathan watched them go. He recognized your father's camera. You saw it too? Yes. Maybe he remembers what my father photographed with it. Jonathan said nothing. Annie turned toward the bare section of the exhibition wall. Her photographs were supposed to remain inside the hotel for a week, protected by security guards, crowds, and dozens of cameras. She had believed the black frame was safer there than in an apartment that had already been searched. Now it was gone. Her stomach tightened. I have to find those photographs. We need to be careful. Way? If Whitmore's people search Daniel's darkroom, they will not leave you alone while you walk into whatever they are protecting. Annie glared at him. Do you think I'm stupid? I think you are angry enough to mistake rushing forward for courage. The paternal tone in his voice made her bristle. I survived 6 months without your protection or your charity, Mr. Hale. I know. Then don't confuse one dance with permission to interfere in my life. I don't. The answer was so immediate that it left her with nowhere to place her anger. Jonathan reached inside his jacket and removed a plain white business card. Only his name was printed on the front. He wrote a number across the back and held it out. My private line. No office. No assistant. Annie did not take it. What exactly do you have? Copies of financial transfers Daniel sent through an encrypted account, 2 development maps, 3 shell companies, and an audio message recorded the night before the crash. Her fingers stopped beside the camera. A recording? Less than a minute. What does my father say? You should hear it in his own voice. Tell me now. Not in a ballroom controlled by the man he was investigating. Annie looked across the room. Whitmore was smiling beside the mayor, one hand resting on the shoulder of a child from East Ward, while a photographer captured the image. Jonathan placed the card on a nearby table. Come to my office tomorrow morning. Bring anyone you trust. I'll show you everything. Annie picked up the card but did not put it away. No. Jonathan studied her. No? I'm not walking into a billionaire's office because he claims he knew my father. That is a reasonable precaution. I don't trust you. You shouldn't. Not yet. His calm response unsettled her more than an argument would have. Annie shoved the card into her coat pocket. I said no. Jonathan nodded. I heard you. She left him at the edge of the dance floor and walked back toward the exhibition gallery, where 3 empty spaces remained beneath the brass lights. Annie walked away believing the argument was over. She did not yet understand that before the night ended, the missing envelope marked 18 would follow her through every dark corner of her father's apartment. Annie reached the apartment just before midnight. The hallway light on the 3rd floor had burned out again, leaving her to find the lock by touch. Mrs. Carter from across the hall had taped a note beside the door. There's chicken casserole in my refrigerator. Knock if you're hungry. I mean it. Annie folded the note and slipped it into her handbag. Mrs. Carter had been leaving food since the funeral: cornbread, baked macaroni, peach cobbler, meals prepared for two, even though she knew only one person remained in the apartment. Inside, the silence felt different after the gala. The rooms had always been quiet without Daniel. But now every shadow seemed to contain a question Jonathan had placed there. Roll 18. Annie locked the door, set her handbag on the kitchen table, and turned on the lamp above the sink. Her father's coffee mug was still in the dish rack. The handle had been repaired with a thin line of glue after Annie dropped it when she was 12. Daniel had continued using it, claiming a good mug did not lose its purpose because someone made a mistake. She took Jonathan's card from her coat pocket and placed it face down on the table. Then she went to the dark room. The small back bedroom had once belonged to Annie. Daniel converted it after she moved into the larger room at 14. Blackout fabric covered the window. Bottles of developer and fixer stood in labeled rows beneath the counter. Contact sheets hung from clips along one wall, each marked with dates, locations, and Daniel's tight handwriting. The person who had broken in 3 weeks earlier had opened every drawer and film box but had left the room looking almost orderly. That was what had frightened her most. Whoever searched it had not been angry or careless. They had known what they wanted. Annie pulled the storage case from beneath the counter and placed it on the work table. Daniel had cataloged his film by year, assignment, and roll number. Annie worked through each envelope slowly. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, then 19. She went back and checked again. There was no 18. She already knew that. She had found the envelope after the break-in, hidden inside the false bottom of Daniel's old camera toolbox. The number had been written in red pencil. Inside was a strip of developed negatives wrapped in archival paper. She had held it toward the light, but the images were too small to understand without making a contact sheet. By then, someone had already searched the apartment, so Annie had hidden the envelope behind the backing board of "Still Here," believing a photograph displayed inside a crowded hotel would be safer than any drawer in Bellhaven. Now the frame was gone. Her phone rang on the work table. Jonathan Hale. She let it ring 4 times before answering. What? I wanted to make sure you arrived home. You don't get to check on me. Understood. Then why are you calling? To ask whether you reconsidered. I haven't. A pause followed. Annie could hear the faint sound of traffic behind him. Your father's recording is still available whenever you are ready, Jonathan said. You keep saying that as if hearing his voice will make me trust you. It shouldn't. Then stop trying to persuade me. I'm not trying to persuade you. I'm giving you information. You're a billionaire. Men like you call pressure information because it sounds cleaner. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. That may be fair. Annie looked at the empty space between envelopes 17 and 19. If this goes wrong, she said, you return to your lawyers, your security team, and whatever house you live in behind a gate. I stay here. I keep being Daniel Brooks's daughter in a city that thinks he was a criminal. I know. No, you know it as a fact. I live it. Yes, Jonathan said. You do. His refusal to defend himself irritated her again. I'm not coming to your office. All right. I mean it. I heard you the first time. She ended the call. Sleep did not come. By 7 the next morning, Annie had cleaned the kitchen, reorganized 2 shelves, and read every article published about her father since the accident. She stopped at the one announcing that the Bellhaven Chronicle had removed Daniel's investigations pending an ethical review. The article included a photograph of him outside the courthouse, holding the Leica and looking tired. Annie closed the laptop and called Evelyn Grant. They met an hour later at Miller's Diner, a narrow place near the old train station where Daniel and Evelyn used to eat after late shifts at the newspaper. The booths were cracked red vinyl. A row of regulars sat at the counter, drinking coffee and arguing about the Steelers. Evelyn was already seated in the back booth with a slice of apple pie and a black coffee. You look terrible, she said as Annie sat down. Good morning to you too. At my age, politeness is reserved for people who have slept. The waitress came over. Annie ordered coffee but no food. Evelyn pushed the pie toward her. Eat. I'm not hungry. You don't have to be hungry. You have to be 18 and awake. Annie took one bite to end the argument. Then she told Evelyn everything. Jonathan's invitation, the dance, Daniel's message, Whitmore's reaction to the camera, and the missing frame. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When Annie finished, the older woman stirred her coffee once. Daniel interviewed Hale 15 years ago, she said. Hale hated the article. He told me my father was fair. He was. That was why Hale hated it instead of suing. You believe him? I believe Jonathan Hale knows how much a public lie costs. That doesn't mean I trust his reasons for telling the truth now. Annie looked down at the table. What if the accusations against Dad were true? Evelyn did not answer immediately. What if he paid someone? Annie continued. What if he staged something because he needed the story? Everyone keeps telling me he was desperate. Evelyn opened her handbag and removed a folded newspaper clipping. It was 14 years old. Daniel's name appeared beneath the headline, followed by a correction printed in bold. He withdrew this investigation 2 days before it was supposed to win a state journalism award, Evelyn said. One source had lied about a meeting. The rest of the story was accurate, but Daniel pulled the whole thing because he said one false fact would poison every true one beside it. He never told me. He was embarrassed. Dad was never embarrassed. Evelyn gave her a look. Your father was embarrassed at least twice a week. He simply preferred making other people uncomfortable first. Annie almost smiled. Evelyn leaned forward. Daniel could be stubborn, careless with his own safety, and impossible when he believed he was right, but he did not manufacture evidence. How can you be sure? Because he understood that truth is fragile enough without the person reporting it putting a thumb on the scale. Annie wrapped both hands around her coffee. Evelyn's voice softened. Justice is not fair by itself, Annie. People make it fair by refusing to leave the facts in the dark. I'm afraid of what I'll find. No, you're afraid those people have told your father's story for so long that their voices may sound more familiar than his. That sentence stayed between them. Annie took Jonathan's card from her handbag. Evelyn looked at it but did not reach for it. If I go, Annie said, you're coming with me. I assumed that was why you bought me breakfast. I didn't buy you anything. Then you owe me pie. Annie called the private number. Jonathan answered on the second ring. I'll come, she said, but I have conditions. I'm listening. You don't speak to the press. You give me copies of everything. Evelyn Grant comes with me. And if the evidence shows my father did something wrong, you tell me without trying to soften it. Jonathan paused. Agreed. Annie looked at Evelyn, then at the old clipping on the table. Show me what he sent you. Jonathan Hale's office occupied the top 3 floors of a converted bank building overlooking downtown Bellhaven, but Annie noticed the old details before she noticed the view. Marble worn smooth near the elevators, brass mail slots preserved along one wall, and a clock above the reception desk that ran 2 minutes slow. Evelyn noticed it too. Expensive building, she said, and no one has fixed the clock. The receptionist looked uncertain whether that was criticism. Jonathan met them outside the conference room without an assistant or security guard beside him. He wore a charcoal suit without a tie, and there were 2 paper cups of coffee and a plate of untouched blueberry muffins on the table. I didn't know what either of you drank, he said. Black, Evelyn replied, and I don't trust muffins that shiny. Jonathan glanced at Annie. Coffee? I'm fine. She remained standing until he placed a slim laptop and 3 folders on the table. No press, Annie said. None. Copies of everything. The drive beside your chair contains the original files Daniel sent me, along with verification data. Evelyn can review them before you leave. And if something makes him look guilty, I won't hide it. Annie sought. Jonathan opened the first folder. It contained transfer records from the Bellhaven Renewal Foundation. Most of the entries appeared ordinary. Payments to contractors, demolition crews, architects, and temporary housing providers. 3 companies had been marked in Daniel's handwriting. Northline Civic Partners, Harbor Crest Materials, Keystone Urban Recovery. All 3 received reconstruction funds, Jonathan said. Together, a little over $8 million. Evelyn adjusted her glasses. Who owns them? On paper, 3 different holding companies. In practice, they share an attorney, a mailing address, and the same financial administrator. Jonathan slid a page across the table. The mailing address belonged to a private office building on Franklin Street. Annie recognized it. That's Whitmore Development. 2 floors of it, Jonathan said. The companies were created within 6 weeks of one another, shortly before the foundation issued its first major contracts. He opened the second folder. It held property maps of East Ward, the neighborhood Annie had photographed since she was 14. Red circles marked houses declared structurally unsound after the flood. Blue squares marked parcels later purchased by companies linked to Whitmore. The patterns overlapped almost perfectly. They condemned the homes, Annie said, then bought the land. At reduced prices, Jonathan replied. Sometimes through third parties. Evelyn pointed to one block. Those houses weren't destroyed. I drove through there last month. The official reports say otherwise. Annie leaned closer. One red circle sat around an abandoned brick warehouse on Mason Avenue. She knew its broken upper windows, loading dock, and faded painted sign. It was the building behind the little girl in Still Here. She touched the map. This warehouse is in my photograph. Jonathan looked at her. Why does that matter? Because my father told me not to delete that picture. When? The week before he died, I thought he liked the reflection in the window. What reflection? The new luxury towers downtown. You can see them behind the girl if you look through the broken glass. Jonathan brought up a digital copy of Annie's submission. He enlarged the image until the warehouse window filled the screen. The reflection showed construction cranes, 2 unfinished towers, and part of a white delivery truck. Evelyn leaned forward. Can you sharpen the lettering? Jonathan enlarged the side of the truck. The image blurred, but 4 letters remained visible. HKMM, Harbor Crest Materials. Annie's pulse quickened. That truck was at a warehouse tied to Whitmore. And your father knew it, Evelyn said. Jonathan opened the final folder. Inside was a printed copy of Daniel's last message. Found a direct link between demolition reports and shell contractors. Photographic record secured. If anything happens, find roll 18. Below it was a second line Daniel had sent 7 minutes later. Do not use Bellhaven Police. The room went still. Jonathan clicked an audio file. Static came first, followed by Daniel's voice. Annie had spent 6 months avoiding old recordings because they made his absence feel newly decided each time. Now his voice came through the speakers, tired and low. Jonathan, I know what I said about never calling you for a favor. Consider this me admitting I was wrong once in 15 years. The money is moving through the foundation, but the land is the real prize. I have photographs. If I don't reach you by Friday, check the 18th roll. Don't take it to Dalton. The recording ended. Annie stared at the laptop. Evelyn covered her mouth with one hand, then lowered it before anyone could mistake the gesture for weakness. Jonathan closed the file. That is everything he sent me. Not everything, Annie said. Both adults looked at her. She told them about the first break-in and the envelope she had found inside the false bottom of Daniel's camera toolbox. She described the red number 18 and the strip of developed negatives wrapped in archival paper. Jonathan's expression sharpened. Where is it now? I hid it behind the backing board of Still Here. Evelyn sat straighter. The photograph removed from the gala? Yes. Why didn't you examine the negatives first? Because someone had already searched the apartment. I didn't know who I could trust. And I wasn't about to take them to a local photo lab. The hotel had security, cameras, hundreds of people. I thought the frame would be safer in public. Jonathan stood. We need to return to the hotel. They reached the Grand Bellhaven just after noon. The chandeliers were dark, and the ballroom smelled of furniture polish and stale wine. Workers rolled tables toward storage, while a vacuum hummed near the stage. Rachel Kim was in the exhibition hall, checking inventory against a clipboard. When she saw Annie, her attention dropped immediately to the Leica. I was told the foundation would contact me, Annie said. Rachel swallowed. Miss Brooks, I'm not authorized to discuss the committee's decision. I'm not asking about the committee. I'm asking where my photographs are. They were transferred to storage. Take us there. Rachel glanced at Jonathan. Mr. Hale, the lower storage level is restricted. Jonathan's voice remained even. Then call whoever can authorize it. 20 minutes later, a hotel security manager led them into the basement. 2 of Annie's frames stood against a concrete wall beneath a sheet of plastic. Still Here was missing. Rachel checked the inventory twice. It was logged here at 9:17 last night. Who moved it? Annie asked. No one should have. The security manager pulled up footage from the basement hallway. At 9:11, Rachel appeared carrying the 3 frames with a hotel employee. At 9:19, the screen froze. The next image was stamped 9:46. 27 minutes had vanished. The manager called a maintenance worker who had been on duty. After several questions, the man remembered two uniformed security contractors carrying a black frame toward the loading dock. Foundation security? Jonathan asked. I assumed so. They had the badges. Annie turned to Rachel. Who ordered my pictures removed? Rachel's fingers tightened around the clipboard. I can't answer that. Can't or won't. Fear crossed Rachel's face before she looked away. That was an answer, even if it was not the one Annie needed. She returned home after sunset. The apartment door was open by less than an inch. Annie stopped in the hallway. The lock hung broken from the frame. She called Jonathan before stepping inside, but the darkroom told her what had happened before he arrived. Trays lay shattered across the floor. Contact sheets had been torn from the walls. Water ran from a broken pipe beneath the sink, carrying strips of film toward the doorway. Someone had taken the computer, Daniel's notebooks, and the remaining storage boxes. Annie found the Leica beneath an overturned chair. She picked it up and ran toward the rear stairs when an engine started in the alley. A black SUV accelerated toward her. Annie froze for half a second. Then Jonathan struck her from the side, throwing both of them behind a row of trash cans as the vehicle jumped the curb and scraped the brick wall. It disappeared at the end of the alley. Jonathan pushed himself upright. Are you hurt? No. Her hands were shaking, but the camera remained locked against her chest. They know about the negatives, she said. We need to get you out of Bellhaven tonight. Annie looked up at the apartment window. Water dripped through the broken frame, and torn pieces of her father's work clung to the glass. No. Annie, they removed my work from the wall. They destroyed his darkroom, but they still don't have what they came for. Jonathan studied her. Do you know where roll 18 is? Not yet. She tightened her grip on the Leica. But I know who ordered that frame removed. By 9 the next morning, Annie was sitting in a booth at a coffee shop across from Bellhaven's old train station, wearing borrowed clothes from Evelyn Grant, and watching Rachel Kim approach through the rain. Rachel stopped twice before reaching the door. The first time, she looked back toward the parking lot. The second, she checked her phone, slipped it into her coat pocket, and stood beneath the awning as if deciding whether unemployment was worse than fear. Jonathan sat beside Annie rather than across from her. He had chosen the seat that gave him a view of the entrance without placing himself between Annie and Rachel. Evelyn remained at the counter with a cup of black coffee, close enough to intervene and far enough to make clear that Annie would lead the conversation. Rachel entered, shook the water from her umbrella, and noticed Jonathan first. You said you'd come alone, she told Annie. I said I wouldn't bring the police. This is Jonathan Hale. I know who he is. Then you know he has more to lose by lying here than I do. Rachel looked at the empty seat across from Annie. I'm not sure that's true. Sit down, Annie said, or leave. But if you leave, don't pretend you never had a choice. Rachel sat. A waitress came over with a menu, and Rachel ordered tea without opening it. Her hands remained wrapped around each other on the table. Annie placed a photograph between them. It showed the basement storage area at the Grand Bellhaven Hotel. Two of Annie's frames stood beneath the plastic sheet. The empty space beside them had been marked with the inventory number assigned to Still Here. Who ordered my photographs removed? Rachel stared at the picture. The curatorial committee. Whitmore said the same thing. Then you already have your answer. No. I have a phrase people use when they don't want their own names attached to a decision. Rachel's eyes moved toward Jonathan. He said nothing. Annie leaned forward. Mr. Whitmore knew which photograph was missing before I told him. He recognized my father's camera. 27 minutes vanished from the basement footage. Two men wearing Foundation security uniforms carried my frame to the loading dock. Last night, someone destroyed my father's darkroom and tried to run me down with a Foundation vehicle. Rachel's face lost color. They tried to hit you? You sound surprised. I didn't know it had gone that far. How far did you think it would go? The waitress returned with the tea and set down a chipped white pot. Rachel waited until she left before answering. I was told the images presented a legal risk, she said. They said Daniel Brooks might have contributed to the work, and the Foundation couldn't display photographs with disputed ownership. My father was dead when I took two of those pictures. I know. You knew? I reviewed the submission dates. Then why did you remove them? Rachel looked down at the steam rising from her cup. Because I was told to. By whom? Silence settled between them. Annie did not fill it. At the counter, Evelyn turned a page of the newspaper. Jonathan watched the rain slide down the window. Finally, Rachel said, "Charles Whitmore." The words were quiet, but they changed the shape of the table. "Did he speak to you directly?" Annie asked. "He sent an email through the executive office. Then he called my supervisor." "What did the email say?" "That all Brooks materials were to be removed before the opening. It specifically named, 'Still Here.'" "Why that one?" "He said the image contained a detail that could create complications for one of the foundation's properties." "The warehouse." Rachel looked up sharply. "You knew it was in the background," Annie said. "I noticed the address in the exhibition notes. The property belongs to a company that received foundation money. Harbor Crest Materials." Rachel's fingers tightened around the cup. "You know about that?" "My father did." Jonathan spoke for the first time. "What happened after you removed the photographs?" Rachel glanced toward the door before answering. "Martin Vale came to the hotel." "The foundation's security director?" She nodded. "He said Whitmore wanted the frames transferred to an off-site storage facility. Did you give them to him?" "I gave him 2. Annie held still. "What happened to Still Here?" Rachel did not answer. "You opened the frame," Annie said. Rachel's eyes met hers. "It was enough. You found the envelope." "I found something behind the backing board." "Marked 18? Rachel swallowed. "Yes." Annie felt anger arrive before relief. "Where is it?" "I don't have it with me." "Where is it?" Rachel looked at Jonathan again. "Can you guarantee my safety?" "No," he said. She blinked, unsettled. "I can arrange legal counsel and secure transportation," Jonathan continued. "I can place you somewhere Martin Vale cannot enter without attracting attention, but anyone who promises absolute safety is selling you something." Rachel gave a strained laugh. "That's not what billionaires usually say. Most billionaires are trying to sell you something." Annie kept her eyes on Rachel. "Why did you take the envelope?" "Because Martin asked about the back of the frame before I told him anything was there. He didn't ask whether it was damaged. He asked whether the backing had been opened." "So you knew he was looking for something?" "I knew enough to be afraid." "And you still handed him the frame?" "I had removed the envelope first. Then you let me spend the night believing it was gone." Rachel's voice tightened. "I didn't know who you were working with. I didn't know whether Jonathan was involved. His name is on the foundation wall." "So you protected yourself?" "Yes." The bluntness checked Annie's anger for a moment. Rachel stared at her untouched tea. "My father has lymphoma. I get his health insurance through my job because he works part-time and doesn't qualify for enough coverage on his own. Whitmore's office reminded me of that after I questioned the order." "What exactly did they say?" "That Bellhaven is a small city and stable employment is difficult to replace. They knew the name of my father's doctor." Jonathan's expression changed, but his voice remained controlled. "Do you still have the email?" "I forwarded it to a private account and printed a copy." "Why?" "Because I wanted proof that I hadn't imagined what they were asking me to do." Annie sat back. "Fear explains why you stayed quiet. It doesn't erase what your silence allowed." Rachel's eyes filled, though she did not look away. "I know." "Do you?" "Yes. Every time I saw your table beside that exit, I knew." The answer landed harder than Annie expected. Rachel had not been unaware. She had watched the humiliation unfold and understood her part in it. "Where did Martin take the frames?" Annie asked. Rachel opened her handbag and removed a folded sheet of paper. An address had been written across the bottom beneath a printed copy of Whitmore's email. Annie recognized Mason Avenue immediately. "The warehouse in my photograph." Rachel nodded. "Martin told the hotel staff it was approved foundation storage. It isn't listed in our regular inventory system." Jonathan examined the email without touching it. "We need to preserve the original." "I know. Do you?" Rachel gave him a hard look. "I may be frightened, Mr. Hale. I'm not incompetent." "Fair enough." Annie took the address. "And the envelope?" Rachel hesitated. "You said you removed it." "I did." "Then where is it?" "I moved it after the gala. I thought my apartment might be watched." "Where, Rachel?" "In an equipment locker at the Bellhaven School of Arts." Annie's breath caught. Rachel raised one hand. "I won't tell you which locker yet, not until I know my father is safe." Jonathan nodded. "That can be arranged." Annie studied Rachel across the table. She wanted the negatives immediately. but forcing Rachel now might send her running back toward the people who frightened her. "Give us the warehouse first," Annie said. "Then we protect your father. After that, you take us to roll 18. Rachel looked relieved, but Annie was not offering comfort. "And when this becomes public," Annie added, "you tell people who ordered those photographs removed." Rachel's voice was barely audible. "I will." Outside, a train pulled away from the station, its brakes groaning against the wet tracks. Annie unfolded the paper again. The address beneath Martinvale's name led back to the same broken window she had photographed in East Ward. The rain had thinned to a cold mist by the time Annie and Jonathan reached Mason Avenue. East Ward looked different through the windshield of Jonathan's plain gray sedan than it did through Annie's camera. In photographs, she could control the frame. She could hold one porch, one face, one broken window long enough for someone to notice. From the car, the neighborhood passed in pieces. Boarded storefronts, brick row houses patched with blue tarps, a church pantry handing out paper grocery bags, and construction cranes rising beyond them where the new luxury district had begun. The warehouse stood at the end of the block behind a chain-link fence. Its faded sign still read Bellhaven Textile Supply, though the company had closed before Annie was born. One upper window was broken in the exact shape she remembered from Still Here. Jonathan parked across the street. "You're sure this is the address Rachel gave you?" Annie held up the folded page. "Unless there are 2 abandoned warehouses at 418 Mason Avenue." "There aren't." "You checked?" "My attorney did." Annie looked at him. "Your attorney works quickly. He charges accordingly." That almost earned a smile, but the sight of the warehouse took it away. Jonathan had spent the drive making calls. The property was registered to Harbor Crest Materials, one of the companies Daniel had identified. Harbor Crest had no employees listed with the state, no public telephone number, and no active business license at this location. Jonathan's lawyer had advised them not to force entry or remove anything. He had also sent the address and ownership records to a federal contact without naming Annie. "You told someone?" she asked when Jonathan explained. "I told an attorney to preserve a record of where we were going. That wasn't one of my conditions." "No. It was a condition of me not allowing an 18-year-old to walk into an abandoned building connected to the man who tried to run her down." Annie turned toward him. "You said you wouldn't control this." "I'm not controlling where you go. I'm making sure someone knows where to look if we don't come back." She disliked the logic because she could not dismiss it. They crossed the street. The gate was secured with a chain, but the pedestrian entrance beside it hung open. Jonathan photographed the gate, the lock, and the open doorway with his phone before either of them stepped inside. "You document everything now?" Annie asked. "Your father made a persuasive case for it." The loading yard smelled of wet concrete and rust. Tire tracks cut through the mud near a roll-up door. Annie crouched beside them and raised the Leica, then hesitated. "There's no film in it," Jonathan said. "I know." She took the photograph anyway. The click gave the moment a boundary. A side door stood open by 3 inches. The lock had not been broken. Someone had simply failed to close it. Jonathan called his attorney again, described the condition of the door, and turned on the recorder on his phone. "We look," he said. "We don't touch anything unless someone is in danger. You say that like you've done this before. I've walked into businesses where people hid money. Usually the buildings had better heating. Inside, the air smelled of damp cardboard and old chemicals. Gray light entered through the broken windows. Most of the floor had been cleared, but black streaks marked the concrete where filing boxes had been burned inside a metal drum. Annie moved toward the far wall. Several picture frames lay in a commercial trash bin. She found the first of her missing photographs face down beneath torn packing foam. The glass was cracked across the image of an elderly couple standing on the steps of their flood-damaged home. The second frame had been split at one corner, though the photograph inside remained intact. Still Here lay beneath them. Annie lifted it before Jonathan could stop her. The black wooden frame felt too light. She turned it over. The brown backing paper had been cut along 3 sides, then folded back into place. Someone had removed the archival envelope without tearing the rest of the frame. "They knew where to look," she said. Jonathan photographed the cut backing. "Rachel found it first. Or Martin did, and she lied to us. She gave us this address. She also watched them seat me beside an exit." Jonathan lowered the phone. "Both things can be true. She can be frightened and still be telling the truth now. That doesn't make what she did harmless." "No, Annie ran one finger near the edge without touching the exposed interior. A yellow-brown mark stained the frame's cardboard backing. Photochemical, she said. You can tell by looking, by the color. Maybe fixer, maybe something older. Could it have come from Daniel's darkroom? Possibly, but not from me. I used gloves when I hid the envelope. Jonathan took another photograph. A movement sounded near the back of the warehouse. Both of them froze. A pigeon burst from the rafters and beat its wings toward the broken window. Annie released the breath she had been holding. You can stop looking pleased with yourself. I don't look pleased. You look like you're about to say this proves I shouldn't have come. It proves abandoned warehouses contain pigeons. They continued toward the burned filing area. Most of the paper had been reduced to black curls, but a few sheets had fallen outside the drum. Annie knelt far enough away to read one without moving it. The page showed a demolition estimate for a property on Grayson Street. The public record Jonathan had shown her listed the cost at $186,000. The sheet on the floor listed $74,500. They charged the foundation more than twice the estimate, Annie said, and the difference went somewhere else. Beside the drum sat a folding table, an unplugged desk lamp, and a box of photographic paper. One sheet protruded from beneath the box. It was not a finished print. The image was faint and uneven, as if someone had exposed it while testing an enlarger. Annie Boncloser. A man stood near the loading door holding an archival envelope in his left hand. The number was too blurred to read, but the size and shape matched Daniel's storage sleeves. He wore a dark jacket with the foundation's security emblem. Behind him, a digital clock mounted above the loading office read 1:42 a.m. Daniel's crash had been reported at 11:37 p.m. This was taken after my father died, Annie said. Jonathan crouched beside her. Can you identify him? Not from this angle. Jonathan zoomed in with his phone. The man's face was turned partly toward the camera. A scar ran from the corner of his jaw toward his left ear. Jonathan's expression changed. You know him. Martin Valle, the foundation's security director. Yes. Annie looked at the envelope in the photograph. If that is roll 18, then someone brought it here after the crash, or someone believed it was roll 18. Either way, Martin was part of the search. Jonathan photographed the test print from several angles, then called his attorney again. This time his voice carried no trace of humor. We found what appears to be destroyed financial material and a photographic image connected to a possible homicide, he said. I need you to contact the federal office now. When the call ended, Annie was still staring at Martin's blurred face. What did he do before he worked for Whitmore? She asked. Jonathan slipped the phone into his pocket. He was a Bellhaven police officer. A cold weight settled in Annie's stomach. Under Dalton? Jonathan looked toward the open warehouse door, then back at her. Directly under him, the corruption had not reached the police after Daniel died. It had been waiting for him there before he ever got into the car. By the time the federal agents arrived at the warehouse, Annie had photographed every object she could see without moving it. The burned documents, the broken frames, the tire tracks near the loading door, and the unfinished print of Martin Vale holding the envelope were recorded from several angles. Jonathan's attorney arrived first. He was a gray-haired man named Leonard Price, who wore a raincoat over his suit and carried a legal pad rather than a briefcase. You touched anything? He asked. The frames, Annie said, before we realized what else was here. Anything else? No. Leonard wrote it down. Good. Don't improve the story later. Accuracy survives. Cross-examination better than pride. Annie disliked the remark, but she understood it. The federal evidence team entered 20 minutes later. They photographed the warehouse again, placed markers beside the burned pages, and sealed the unfinished print inside a clear evidence sleeve. No one announced that they had solved anything. No one promised that Daniel's name would be cleared by morning. They worked. Annie watched them move through the building and thought of her father labeling envelopes at the kitchen table. Daniel had believed that facts became stronger when people handled them carefully. On the drive back, she opened the digital archive Jonathan's office had made from Daniel's surviving photographs. What are you looking for? Jonathan asked. Martin. You already have his picture. I have one picture of him holding an envelope. I want to know how long he had been following my father. She searched by date, beginning 3 months before the crash. Daniel's assignments filled the screen, condemned homes, city council meetings, displaced families, and construction crews working behind temporary fences. In a photograph taken outside Whitmore Development, a man stood near a parked SUV with his face turned away. Annie enlarged the image. The scar along his jaw was faint but visible. "Martin," she said. Jonathan pulled into an empty parking space before looking. The next image had been taken 9 days later at a public hearing. Daniel had focused on a woman speaking at the microphone, but Martin stood near the rear doors. A third photograph showed him across the street from Daniel's apartment. "He wasn't protecting the foundation," Annie said. "He was watching my father." Jonathan studied the dates. "These began 7 weeks before the crash. And Daniel never told me. He may have been trying to keep you out of it. He kept me uninformed. That isn't the same as keeping me safe." "No," Jonathan said. "It isn't." Annie looked at him. Most adults would have defended Daniel, or told her not to speak badly of the dead. Jonathan let the anger remain where it belonged. Leonard arranged a meeting that afternoon at the FBI field office outside downtown Belhaven. The building was plain, set back from the road behind concrete barriers and a flagpole. No brass plaques carried Jonathan's name. Special Agent Renee Alvarez met them in a conference room on the second floor. She was 48, with dark hair pulled away from her face, and a navy jacket folded over the back of her chair. She shook Annie's hand first. "Miss Brooks, Annie is fine. Then call me Agent Alvarez until we know each other better." It was not warmth, but it was respect. Alvarez listened while Annie described the missing photographs, the break-ins, the SUV, Rachel's email, and the warehouse. Jonathan spoke only when asked about the files Daniel sent him. When they finished, Alvarez placed both hands on the closed folder before her. "The foundation received federal reconstruction money," she said. "That gives us jurisdiction over fraud involving those funds. If city officials helped conceal it, we may also be dealing with public corruption and obstruction." "And my father's murder?" Annie asked. "We do not have a murder case yet. His brakes may have been cut. May have been. We need the vehicle examined by independent specialists. We need the original evidence records, access logs, and a court order. You have a photograph of Martin beside his car. We have a photograph of a man near a vehicle. That is important. It is not proof that he damaged it." Annie sat back. "So we wait while they destroy whatever is left?" "No." Alvarez's voice remained level. "We move as quickly as the evidence allows." "That sounds like waiting with better paperwork." Jonathan glanced at Annie but did not interrupt. Alvarez leaned forward. "Justice can feel slow when you are the one carrying the harm. But a case built too quickly is a door the guilty can walk back through. My father didn't get time." "I know. You didn't know him." "No. But I know what happens when investigators promise a family more than the evidence can carry." Annie held her gaze. "Then don't promise me anything. Tell me what you need. The original negatives, the original email Rachel received, access to Daniel's complete archive, the identity of anyone who handled that frame, and time to verify every claim before Whitmore's lawyers hear it. We know where Roll 18 is," Jonathan said. Alvarez looked at him. "Do you possess it?" "No. Rachel Kim says she hid it at the Belhaven School of Arts." "Has anyone confirmed that?" "Not yet." "Then we do not know where it is. We know what one frightened witness told you." Annie thought of Rachel wrapping both hands around an untouched cup of tea. "She wants her father protected. We can discuss witness protection measures if she gives a formal statement. We cannot trade protection for evidence as though this were a private agreement. She thinks Whitmore will cancel her father's insurance. That threat matters. It also needs to be documented." Alvarez slid a card across the table. "If Rachel contacts you, do not arrange another private meeting. Call me. Preserve every message. Do not tell her what to say." "You think we coached her?" Annie asked. "I think Whitmore's attorneys will claim you did. My job is to make sure the facts survive people who are paid to distort them." Annie took the card. "What about my apartment?" "Belhaven police still have local authority over the break-in. Dalton controls Belhaven police." "I'm aware. Then why would I report anything to them?" "Because an official report creates a record they cannot later claim never existed. A state investigator will be present when you file it." For the first time that afternoon, Annie felt the difference between being dismissed and being told something she did not want to hear. Alvarez was not asking for trust. She was explaining the structure of the work. Jonathan rose when Annie did. but Alvarez stopped him. "One more thing, Mr. Hale. Your company appears in the Foundation's promotional and financial records. I know. Your role will be examined too." "It should be." Alvarez studied him for a second, then nodded. Outside, rain had begun again. Annie stood beneath the concrete overhang, looking at the two cards in her hand. Jonathan's private number and Alvarez's federal contact information. Her phone rang before they reached the car. The number was blocked. Annie answered. "Hello?" Rachel's breath came quickly through the speaker. "They know I spoke to you." "Who?" "I don't know. Martin, maybe." Someone went through my desk. My supervisor asked why I printed Whitmore's email. "Where are you?" "At work. I can't stay on this phone." Annie looked through the glass doors at Alvarez, who was still visible inside the lobby. "Rachel, listen to me. Don't leave alone." "I found another message," Rachel whispered. "Whitmore didn't just order the photograph removed. He wrote that the Brooks frame had to be secured before Martin arrived. Send it to me." "I can't. They monitor the system." "Then send it to the FBI." Silence followed. When Rachel spoke again, her voice was smaller. "I'm ready to give you Roll 18. The line went dead. Annie pushed back through the glass doors before Jonathan could ask what Rachel had said. Agent Alvarez was still in the lobby, speaking with the receptionist. "She's ready to surrender the negatives," Annie said. "She's at the Bellhaven School of Arts, and she thinks someone searched her desk." Alvarez ended the conversation with the receptionist. "Did she give you a location inside the building?" "No." The call ended. "Call her back once. Put it on speaker." Rachel did not answer. Alvarez contacted 2 agents, then turned to Annie. "You and Mr. Hale will follow us. You will not enter until we confirm she is safe." "She called me. That does not make the building safe." Jonathan touched Annie's elbow lightly. "Let them go first." She pulled away but followed him to the car. The Bellhaven School of Arts occupied a former public library on Carver Street, 4 blocks from East Ward. Daniel had brought Annie there when she was 9, to see an exhibition of civil rights photography. She remembered standing beneath images of children facing police dogs and asking why the photographers had not helped them. "They did," Daniel had told her. "They made sure the world could not claim it never happened." Now 2 unmarked federal vehicles waited near the side entrance. Alvarez met Annie and Jonathan beneath the stone archway. Rachel sent a text to her father 20 minutes ago. She told him to stay at the hospital and not return home. "We have an agent contacting him." "Did she say why?" "No." The main building was nearly empty. Evening classes had ended, leaving only a custodian, 2 graduate students, and a security guard, who looked frightened when Alvarez showed her identification. Rachel's name was not in the visitor log. "She has staff access," the guard said. "The Foundation rents gallery equipment from us." "Where are the equipment lockers?" Alvarez asked. "Basement level." They found Rachel sitting on the floor between 2 rows of metal cabinets. Her coat was folded beneath her father's medical file, and both hands were pressed against a small gray locker. When Annie entered behind Alvarez, Rachel exhaled. "You brought the FBI. You asked for protection. I asked for you. And if I came alone, neither of us would be safe." Rachel looked toward Alvarez. "Is my father all right?" "An agent has spoken with him," Alvarez said. "He is still at Street Matthews Medical Center. A state officer is with him until we assess the threat. Whitmore can cancel his insurance. He cannot cancel a policy retroactively because you report a federal crime. If someone threatens to do that, we document it." Rachel nodded, though she did not look convinced. Alvarez crouched several feet away. "Do you possess evidence belonging to Daniel Brooks?" "Yes." "Has anyone else handled it since you removed it from the frame?" "Only me." "Did you open the archival paper?" "No." "Did you photograph or copy the negatives?" "No." "Then do not touch the locker again. Tell me the combination." Rachel gave her the numbers. An evidence technician photographed the closed locker, the combination dial, and Rachel's employee access card before opening it. Inside sat a canvas equipment bag. A sealed archival envelope rested beneath 2 light meters. The number 18 had been written across the front in red pencil. Annie recognized her father's handwriting before she saw his initials in the lower corner. Her breath caught. Jonathan stood behind her without speaking. The technician photographed the envelope, placed it inside a clear evidence sleeve, and sealed the sleeve with a numbered strip. "I need to see what's on it," Annie said. "You will," Alvarez replied. But not here. They moved the evidence to an independent forensic imaging laboratory used by the FBI. Evelyn met them there an hour later, carrying reading glasses, a notebook, and the black coffee she seemed able to obtain regardless of time or location. When she saw Rachel, she said, "You preserved the original?" "I think so. You either did, or you didn't. I removed it from the frame with clean cotton gloves. I placed it in a new archival sleeve without touching the film." Evelyn's expression softened. "Then you did." The lab specialist opened the package beneath a camera while Alvarez recorded the time, location, and names of everyone present. The film had already been developed and cut into strips. There were 18 frames, no signs of alteration, the specialist said after the first examination. The edge markings are continuous. Same film stock, same development batch. Evelyn watched him place the strips against a light table. "Make a contact sheet before enlarging anything." "That's the plan. Young people say that, then rush to the scanner." The specialist glanced at Alvarez. "Is she always like this?" "According to Miss Brooks, yes." Annie almost smiled. The contact sheet emerged in stages. Small rectangles appeared across the paper, gray at first, then darkening into streets, buildings, vehicles, and faces. Annie leaned closer without crossing the marked line around the work surface. The first images showed homes in East Ward marked with red demolition notices. Annie recognized several houses still occupied after engineers had said they could be repaired. The next frames showed new roofing material being loaded from a foundation truck into the Mason Avenue warehouse. Then came Martin Vale handing a thick envelope to Frank Dalton in a parking garage. Jonathan's face hardened. That was not in any public report. Frame 5 showed Whitmore at a folding table with 3 contractors. A development map lay open between them. In frame 6, the figures on a contract were visible beneath a desk lamp. "Can you enlarge that?" Annie asked. The specialist scanned it. 2 amounts appeared. An approved payment of $480, $6,000, and a handwritten estimate of $190, $1,000. "They inflated the contract," Rachel whispered. "Or someone altered the estimate," Alvarez said. "We verify before we conclude." The next images showed property maps, residents signing relocation documents, and a city inspector receiving a cash-filled envelope. Then the sequence shifted. Frame 14 showed Martin standing beside Daniel's car behind the warehouse. Frame 15 showed him crouched near the rear wheel. In frame 16, a black SUV waited at the end of the alley. Frame 17 showed the SUV following Daniel's car onto Mason Avenue. No one spoke as the final image appeared. Daniel's reflection filled a broken warehouse window. He held the Leica near his chest and looked over his shoulder toward the SUV. His face was tense, but steady. He knew someone was watching him. Annie had not seen her father alive in a new image for 6 months. She placed one hand against the edge of the table. Evelyn moved beside her but did not offer comfort Annie had not requested. "He knew," Annie said. "He knew he was being followed," Alvarez replied. "The photograph does not tell us what he believed would happen next, but it tells us the police report was incomplete. It gives us grounds to challenge it." Annie looked at the 18 small frames. Her father had not left behind a finished accusation. He had left a sequence of facts, each carrying only what it could prove. Evelyn rested her hand on Annie's shoulder. "He knew someone needed to see this," she said. Alvarez closed the evidence log. "I'm requesting an emergency order to examine Daniel's vehicle before anyone else gains access to it." Annie looked again at Martin beside the rear wheel. 6 months after the crash, her father's car was about to be examined for the first time by people who were not paid to look away. The emergency order was signed at 6:40 the next morning. By 8, Daniel Brooks's car had been moved from the Bellhaven Police Evidence Garage to a secured state facility outside the city, where 2 federal vehicle examiners, a digital systems specialist, and an independent mechanic waited beneath white industrial lights. Annie stood behind a glass partition with Agent Alvarez, Jonathan, and Evelyn. The car looked smaller than she remembered. Its front end had been crushed inward, the windshield fractured across the passenger side, and one rear door was streaked with mud that had hardened 6 months ago. Annie had seen photographs in the police report, but the images had turned the wreck into an object. Seeing it in front of her restored its purpose. Her father had driven that car to work, taken her to school in it, and kept peppermint wrappers in the center console because he claimed they helped him think. Alvarez placed a folder on the narrow counter. The original report states that your father entered the curve above the speed limit, failed to brake, and struck the guardrail. He never drove fast on wet roads, Annie said. We establish what the vehicle shows, not what anyone remembers. The first examiner raised the car on a hydraulic lift. A camera recorded each movement. He removed the rear wheel, inspected the brake assembly, then called the second examiner over. They spoke quietly before Alvarez joined them. Annie watched their faces. What did they find? She asked when Alvarez returned. The rear brake line was cut. Jonathan's hand tightened around the back of a chair. With what? Annie asked. A narrow cutting tool. The edge is too clean for road damage. Then Martin did it. We have a photograph of Martin crouched beside the wheel, Alvarez said. We now have physical evidence that the brake line was cut. We still need to connect the two. Annie looked through the glass at the car. How much more connection do you need? Enough that 12 jurors cannot be persuaded it was coincidence. The digital specialist worked inside the driver's side for nearly an hour. He removed the event data recorder, connected it to a forensic computer, and frowned at the screen. The crash data is gone, he said. Corrupted? Alvarez asked. Erased. Manually, after the collision. The evidence access log showed that 3 people had entered the garage during the week after Daniel's death. 2 were listed as accident investigators. The third was Martin Vale, whose name appeared under an authorization code belonging to Commissioner Dalton's office. The mechanic found another irregularity. A brake component had been replaced after the crash with a damaged part from a different vehicle. The replacement created the appearance of mechanical failure caused by impact. They didn't just sabotage the car, Jonathan said. They rebuilt the evidence afterward. Alvarez did not disagree. Near the rear quarter panel, the examiners collected a thin strip of black paint. Its chemical composition matched the finish used on the security company's fleet of SUVs. It did not identify a single vehicle, but it supported what Daniel's photographs showed. Another vehicle had been close enough to make contact. By noon, Alvarez had enough to request search warrants for Martin's home, the Foundation's security offices, and the company garage. She also placed a hold on every vehicle registered to Whitmore's contractors. Annie expected the findings to make her feel vindicated. Instead, she felt cold. Her father had not lost control because he was tired. He had not made one careless mistake after a long night. Someone had cut the brakes, followed him onto the highway, and then changed the evidence after he died. The truth did not make the loss cleaner. It made it deliberate. Evelyn handed her a paper cup of coffee from the vending machine. It's terrible, she said. Drink it anyway. Annie took a sip and nearly winced. You weren't exaggerating. I'm too old to waste exaggeration on coffee. Jonathan had moved away from them and was speaking to Leonard Price near the exit. His face was turned partly aside, but Annie heard the words, media response, and company records. Her phone vibrated. A local news alert filled the screen. Commissioner, Dalton questions. Federal review of Brooks' crash. Within minutes, every television in the waiting area carried Dalton's press conference. He stood behind a police podium with the Bellhaven seal above his shoulder. This department fully investigated the tragic death of Daniel Brooks, he said. Recent claims appear to be driven by political pressure, private financial interests, and the understandable emotions of a grieving young woman. Annie stared at the screen. A reporter asked whether the brake line had been cut. Dalton's expression remained calm. I will not comment on unverified leaks. Another reporter asked about Martin Vale's access to the evidence garage. Mr. Vale previously worked with this department and occasionally provided consulting services. His presence proves nothing improper. Then a familiar photograph appeared beside Dalton's image, Annie at the gala, holding Jonathan's hand on the dance floor. The news anchor described her as the 18-year-old daughter of the disgraced journalist, now working closely with billionaire donor Jonathan Hale. The next segment replayed the accusations against Daniel. A supposed ethics expert questioned whether Daniel had staged photographs. A Foundation spokesperson suggested Jonathan was attempting to discredit Whitmore before a major land redevelopment vote. Annie turned off the television. They are using me to make this look like a business dispute. Jonathan had returned. That is the strategy. Is it true? He paused. Which part? Did your company want the East Ward redevelopment? Leonard began to speak, but Jonathan raised a hand. Yes, he said. Annie's jaw tightened. 3 years ago, my urban systems division explored a transportation and housing project in Belhaven. Jonathan continued. We withdrew before submitting a bid. Why? Because the land plan assumed nearly 400 families would leave East Ward. And you walked away? We told the city the proposal was unacceptable. Did you tell the public? No. Why not? Because the city said it was an early draft, and I accepted that explanation. Annie laughed once without humor. You accept convenient explanations often. Yes. You could gain from Whitmore falling. My company could gain from almost any major change in Belhaven. That is why you should review every document. He opened his phone, accessed a secure folder, and handed it to her. Board emails, development proposals, financial models, my decision to withdraw. Leonard will give you the complete archive. You expect me to read all of this? I expect you not to take my word for it. The answer disarmed her anger without removing it. You were part of the same system, Annie said. I was. You gave Whitmore money. I did. You let your name help him look respectable. Yes. And now you want me to believe you grew a conscience. Jonathan held her gaze. No. I want you to decide whether what I am doing now is useful. A clean conscience is easy when no one has ever offered you a profit for looking away. Annie handed the phone back. I'm going through every file. You should. Her own phone rang before she could answer. Rachel's name appeared on the screen. Annie picked up. Rachel spoke in a whisper. They fired me. Where are you? At my apartment. Is your father safe? He's still at the hospital. Annie, there's a black SUV across the street. It's been there for 20 minutes. Annie looked at Alvarez. Rachel's voice dropped further. I think they know I gave you the film. Agent Alvarez took Annie's phone before Rachel could hang up. Rachel, this is Special Agent Renee Alvarez. Stay away from the windows. Do not leave through the front entrance. Is there another way out? Rachel's breathing came fast through the speaker. A service stairwell behind the laundry room. It opens into the alley. Good. Take your identification, your phone, and any medication you need. Leave everything else. What about my apartment? Your apartment can be replaced. You cannot. Alvarez covered the microphone and looked at Jonathan. Do you have a vehicle that cannot be connected to you through a basic search? My attorney's sedan is in the lower garage. Leonard Price removed the keys from his coat pocket. It is 20 years old, smells like stale peppermint, and has never inspired envy in anyone. That will do, Alvarez said. She assigned 2 agents to approach Rachel's building from the front while Annie, Jonathan, and Leonard drove around the back. Annie objected before Alvarez finished explaining. You're sending me with them? Rachel called you. Seeing you may keep her from panicking. And if the SUV follows us? It probably will. That is why state police are waiting 3 miles east. Jonathan took the keys. You heard her. I heard both of you deciding things around me. Alvarez held Annie's gaze. Then decide whether you can follow instructions long enough to keep Rachel alive. Annie said nothing more. Leonard's sedan was a faded blue Buick with cracked leather seats and a rosary looped around the rearview mirror. Jonathan drove. Annie sat in the back beside an empty canvas bag Alvarez had given her. What is this for? She asked. To carry the copies, Alvarez said through the open window before they left. If anyone is watching, let them believe the evidence is with you. The original negatives are at the FBI lab. Yes. So this is bait. It is a visible object carried by someone they believe has what they want. That sounds like bait. Alvarez shut the door. Do not get out of the vehicle unless Jonathan tells you. The Buick rolled through downtown traffic and turned toward Rachel's neighborhood. Rainwater collected along the gutters. Storefront windows reflected the car in broken sections, and Annie found herself checking each reflection before she checked the street itself. At Rachel's building, Jonathan stopped beside the alley entrance without turning off the engine. Rachel appeared 30 seconds later carrying a purse and a paper pharmacy bag. She looked behind her twice before opening the rear door. Get in, Annie said. Rachel slid beside her. The SUV is still out front. Did anyone see you leave? I don't know. Jonathan pulled away. They had gone 2 blocks when Annie saw the black vehicle in the window of a closed barber shop. It turned at the same corner and maintained its distance. We have company, she said. Jonathan checked the mirror. How far? Half a block. Rachel twisted around. Don't, Annie told her. Let them think we haven't noticed. The SUV followed them across the old railway bridge. Jonathan did not speed. He drove as though he were taking two young women to lunch, rather than carrying a federal witness away from men connected to a murder. Rachel gripped the pharmacy bag. Where are we going? A state police post, Annie said. You said the FBI would protect my father. They are. What if Whitmore has someone at the hospital? An agent is with him. You don't know what Whitmore can do. Annie looked at her. Neither did my father. That is why we stop pretending one hiding place will keep the truth safe. She opened the canvas bag. Inside were printed contact sheets, a flash drive, and 3 envelopes labeled with Daniel's handwriting copied from the original. None contained evidence that did not already exist elsewhere. Rachel stared at them. You copied everything? The FBI has the originals. Evelyn has a contact sheet. Jonathan has encrypted scans. Agent Alvarez has the forensic files. A newspaper outside Bellhaven receives another copy tonight unless I cancel the delivery. You set that up? Last night. Jonathan glanced at Annie in the mirror but said nothing. Rachel sank back against the seat. Daniel kept one copy, and that nearly cost us everything. The SUV moved closer as they entered the industrial district. Its front grille filled more of the rear window. Jonathan turned onto a narrow road running between an abandoned steel plant and a row of storage yards. This isn't the way to the state police post, Rachel said. It is the way to the people following us, Jonathan replied. The SUV accelerated. Jonathan took the next turn hard enough to shift Annie against the door. The Buick entered an old service road beneath the elevated railway tracks. Ahead, orange construction barriers narrowed the lane. Hold on, he said. The SUV struck the Buick's rear bumper. Rachel screamed. Jonathan kept the car straight. Everyone all right? Yes, Annie said. The vehicle hit them again, harder. A side mirror appeared beside Annie's window. Martin Vale sat in the passenger seat of the SUV. The scar along his jaw was clearer than it had been in Daniel's photographs. He lowered his window. Pull over, he shouted. You're carrying stolen property. Annie held up the canvas bag. Martin's eyes fixed on it. Jonathan saw the movement in the mirror. Annie put it down. Instead, she set the bag beside her where Martin could still see it. The SUV surged ahead and cut across the Buick's front bumper. Jonathan braked. Both cars stopped at an angle beneath the railway structure. Martin jumped out before the SUV had settled. He opened Annie's door and reached for the bag. She pulled it toward her. Let go, he said. No. He caught the strap and dragged her halfway across the seat. Jonathan came around the front of the Buick, but Martin's driver stepped out holding a tire iron. Then red and blue lights flooded the concrete pillars. 3 state police vehicles closed the road from both directions. Martin released the bag. The tire iron hit the pavement. Hands where I can see them, an officer shouted. Martin raised his arm slowly. This is a misunderstanding. That girl has foundation property. Annie stepped from the Buick, still holding the canvas bag against her chest. A state trooper secured Martin's wrists and searched his jacket. He found a folding knife, 2 phones, and an access badge for the Bellhaven Renewal Foundation. Martin looked at Annie as he was led toward the patrol car. You have no idea what you're carrying. Annie opened the bag and removed one of the envelopes. Copies, she said. You chased us across Bellhaven for copies. For the first time, Martin's face lost its control. My father made one set, Annie continued. I learned from what that cost him. The trooper placed Martin in the back of the cruiser. Rachel stood beside the Buick, trembling. She watched until the patrol car door closed. I have to testify now, don't I? She asked. Annie did not soften the answer. You had to testify before they followed you. Now you understand why. Rachel looked at the damaged bumper, then at the bag in Annie's hands. I want my father moved somewhere safe. Agent Alvarez will arrange it. And I want a lawyer who doesn't work for the foundation. Jonathan nodded. Leonard will find someone independent. You choose whether to accept. Rachel drew a slow breath. Then I'll give a formal statement. Everything. The emails, the frame, Martin, all of it. Annie closed the bag. Rachel had protected the negative in secret. What came next would require her to protect the truth where everyone could see her. Rachel spent the next 4 hours with Agent Alvarez, a federal prosecutor, and an attorney Leonard had found outside Bellhaven. By evening, her father had been moved from Street Matthews to another medical facility under a different registration name. Martin Vale remained in state custody on charges related to the pursuit and attempted theft. Though Alvarez warned that holding him would not stop Whitmore or Dalton from acting through someone else, Annie stayed at Evelyn Grant's house that night. The narrow brick home stood on a quiet street lined with sycamore trees and porches built before anyone thought 2 cars belonged in every driveway. Inside, framed newspaper pages covered one wall. Boxes of photographs occupied another. The furniture had been chosen for use rather than appearance, and every lamp cast enough light to read by. Evelyn placed meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans on the kitchen table. "I'm not hungry," Annie said. "I didn't ask. You sound like Mrs. Carter." "Mrs. Carter is a sensible woman." Jonathan stood near the doorway, holding a coffee mug. "May I sit?" Evelyn looked at him over her glasses. "You financed half the new medical center and still ask permission to use a kitchen chair?" "It isn't my kitchen. That may be the first intelligent thing a billionaire has said in this house." He sat across from Annie. No one discussed Martin while they ate. Evelyn told a story about Daniel setting off a courthouse fire alarm in 2009 because he had tried to warm a sandwich on an office heater. Jonathan admitted Daniel had once kept him waiting in an unheated hallway for 40 minutes after Jonathan's public relations director attempted to cancel an interview. He said a man who controlled his own schedule could afford to wait, Jonathan recalled. "That sounds like him," Annie said. The words came without the pain she expected. They still hurt, but the hurt no longer closed her throat. After dinner, Evelyn brought out a cardboard archive box the FBI had returned after scanning its contents. Daniel's notebooks were unavailable as evidence, but the box contained duplicate notes, old contact sheets, and personal correspondence that had been stored at the Chronicle rather than the apartment. "He kept copies everywhere," Annie said. "He trusted systems more than people," Evelyn replied. "Systems leave records." Jonathan set his coffee aside. "That may be why Whitmore worked so hard to destroy his reputation. If people stopped trusting Daniel, they would stop trusting anything he left behind." Annie opened the first folder. Daniel's final investigation had begun with complaints from East Ward residents. Insurance payments arrived late. Repair grants disappeared after approval. Contractors listed work that had never been completed. Daniel had written names, dates, addresses, and questions in the margins. He had not started with Whitmore. He had started with a 72-year-old veteran named Calvin Reed, whose roof grant had been marked complete even though rain still entered his bedroom. Another note concerned a grandmother caring for 3 children in a house, declared unsafe 2 weeks after she refused to sell it. Daniel had followed each claim until the pattern led to the foundation. He wasn't investigating money at first, Annie said. He was investigating why people were still living like the flood happened yesterday. That was Daniel, Evelyn said. He followed the person before he followed the number. Annie found a page dated 5 days before the crash. Dalton cannot be trusted. Vale has been outside apartment twice. Need independent chain for images. Contact Hale because his funding connects him whether he likes it or not. Jonathan read the line without defending himself. The next page contained a list. Protect sources, copy records, move Annie for a few days, meet federal contact Friday. Friday had arrived 2 days after Daniel died. Annie pressed her thumb against the edge of the paper. He knew there was danger, Jonathan said. That doesn't mean he knew what they planned. He was going to move me. He was trying to. He should have told me. Evelyn sat beside her. Yes. Annie looked up, surprised. You don't have to make him perfect because he died, Evelyn continued. Daniel loved you. He also made decisions for you when he was afraid. Both things can be true. He thought he could finish it alone. He thought experience made him harder to reach than he was. Annie turned to the last folder. Inside was an envelope bearing her name. The flap had never been sealed. She opened it. Annie, if you are reassurance because I finally learned to organize my desk, then ignore the serious tone and buy your father dinner. If you are reading it for another reason, remember that fear does not make a person weak. Fear is information. Listen to it. But do not let it hold the camera. A photograph can make people stop. Truth changes something only when the person holding the camera is willing to stand beside the image and say, "This is what I saw." Do not inherit my mistakes just because you inherited my name. Love, Dad. Annie read the letter twice. Then she placed it on the table and covered her face with both hands. The tears came without warning. They were not dramatic. There was no collapse, no cry that filled the room. Her shoulders moved once, then again, as 6 months of anger found the space beneath it. Evelyn rested a hand between her shoulder blades. Jonathan remained where he was. No one told Annie that Daniel was in a better place. No one said everything happened for a reason. They allowed grief to remain what it was, love with nowhere to go and no obligation to become beautiful. After a minute, Annie wiped her face with the napkin Evelyn handed her. He knew he might not come home. Yes, Evelyn said. And he still went. Yes, I don't know whether to be proud of him or furious. You are allowed both. Annie folded the letter along its original crease. Jonathan looked toward the folders. Agent Alvarez can release the photographs after the warrants are executed. Her office can present the evidence. No. Annie, a federal press conference would protect the integrity of the investigation. It would also turn my father into a paragraph in someone else's announcement. Evelyn watched her carefully. What are you thinking? The award ceremony is tomorrow night. Whitmore plans to tell that room the allegations are finished. He'll give Tyler the prize, praise the foundation, and use my father's name as a warning. Jonathan understood first. You want to show the photographs there? I want to finish the story where they removed mine. They may cut the power. Your company provides the hotel's presentation system. A small change crossed Jonathan's face. Not surprise. Recognition. Yes. Can you keep an outside stream running? I can. Then give me your speaking time. Jonathan leaned back. Whitmore will claim I wrote every word. Let him. He will call you a child. He already does. He will say grief has made you unstable. He already says that too. Evelyn tapped the stack of contact sheets. Then don't give him anger he can edit into a headline. Give him facts. Annie nodded. For the next 3 hours, she arranged the 18 photographs in order. Beneath each one, she wrote only what could be established. The date, the location, the people visible, the matching record, and the questions the image raised. She did not call Whitmore a murderer. She did not claim Martin had cut the brake line in the photograph. She let the sequence carry its own weight. Shortly after midnight, Jonathan read the final slide. You sound like Daniel, he said. Annie looked at the Leica on the table. No, she replied. I sound like the person he taught to check the frame. Daniel had taught her never to demand more from a photograph than it contained. Tomorrow night, Annie would make the room look at exactly what the pictures could bear. The Grand Bellhaven Hotel looked unchanged from the week before. The same brass lamps lit the entrance. The same attendants opened car doors beneath the awning. Inside, the same blue and gold banners praised the Bellhaven Renewal Foundation for rebuilding communities it had helped empty. Annie stood across the street with Daniel's Leica hanging from its worn strap around her neck. Her aunt had altered the dark blue dress that afternoon, taking in the waist and repairing a seam by hand. Before Annie left, she had smoothed the fabric across Annie's shoulders and said, Your father always believed good clothes could make a person brave. Annie had answered, He believed good clothes made people listen long enough for him to make them uncomfortable. Her aunt had smiled. That too. Now Annie watched guests pass through the hotel doors. Reporters crowded near the entrance. Whitmore had expanded the award ceremony into a public declaration that the foundation had survived what his office called a campaign of misinformation. Jonathan stopped beside her. He wore a black suit and carried no folder. Everything is ready, he said. The presentation exists on the hotel server, my company's backup system, and an outside streaming platform. If they shut off the ballroom screens, the broadcast continues. Who controls the stream? A technician who works for me, not Whitmore. And if someone reaches him, there are 2 technicians in different buildings. Annie glanced at him. You learn quickly. I had a good teacher. Evelyn approached from the car behind them, buttoning a dark wool coat over her evening dress. Are we standing in the cold for dramatic effect? Or may an old woman go inside before her knees file a complaint? Annie crossed the street. 2 hotel security guards stopped her before she reached registration. One checked a tablet, while the other positioned himself between Annie and the ballroom. Your name is not on the approved guest list, he said. It was last week. This is a separate event. I'm one of the participating photographers. The final artist roster has already been confirmed. Annie held out her invitation. The guard barely looked at it. Jonathan stepped forward, but Annie raised one hand. "Read the name," she told the guard. He frowned. "Excuse me? Look at the invitation and read my name." The second guard glanced toward the registration desk, where guests had begun to watch. The first guard took the card. "Annie Brooks. Now check the Foundation's original submission records." "We don't have access to those." "Then call Rachel Kim. She is no longer employed by the Foundation. Call the event director." The guard lowered his voice. "Miss Brooks, we have been instructed not to admit anyone who may disrupt the program." "Who gave that instruction?" "I'm not authorized to discuss security procedures." Jonathan moved beside Annie, not in front of her. "My name should be on your list." The guard's posture changed. "Yes, Mr. Hale. I have an 8-minute address after the photography award." "Yes, sir." "Miss Brooks is using that time." The guard looked at his colleague. "We weren't informed." "You are informed now." A hotel manager hurried over, his expression already arranged into concern. "Mr. Hale, perhaps we could discuss this privately." "No. There may be legal complications." "Then bring your lawyer into the ballroom. Annie is coming with me." The manager turned to her. "Miss Brooks, surely you understand that emotions are high. We are trying to avoid an incident." Annie met his eyes. "You seated me beside an emergency exit, removed my photographs, and erased my name from the program. The incident began before I walked through the door. The people behind them had stopped pretending not to listen." The manager stepped aside. Inside the ballroom, every table was occupied. The Foundation had filled the front rows with donors, city officials, contractors, and families chosen for the evening's promotional photographs. A large screen above the stage displayed Tyler Grant's winning image of East Ward. Tyler stood near the podium in a new tuxedo, accepting congratulations. When he saw Annie, his smile faltered. He looked toward Whitmore as if waiting for instructions. Whitmore stood beside Police Commissioner Dalton at the front table. His face did not change when Annie entered, but his fingers stopped against the stem of his glass. He expected security to handle it, Evelyn murmured. Jonathan's assigned table was in the first row. He took the aisle seat and left the chair beside him for Annie. Evelyn sat on her other side. Near the rear wall, Rachel waited in a plain black dress with Agent Alvarez 2 seats away. Rachel's father was safe, but the strain of the past week showed in the way she held her hands together. When Annie looked back, Rachel gave one small nod. Alvarez did not. She watched Dalton, the master of ceremonies, approach the microphone and thanked the guests for supporting responsible renewal, ethical storytelling, and the next generation of Belhaven artists. Annie felt Evelyn's hand close briefly around her wrist. "Breathe before you speak," Evelyn said. "Not because you're afraid, because people hear a rushed voice and assume uncertainty." Tyler received the Belhaven Emerging Vision Award. In his speech, he thanked Whitmore for teaching him that photography could give a voice to overlooked communities. Annie looked at the residents of East Ward seated near the back, behind the major donors. A voice was not something Tyler or Whitmore could give them. They had voices. The room had simply decided whose voices were worth amplifying. Whitmore took the stage next. He spoke about unity, service, and the danger of allowing suspicion to undermine charitable work. He did not mention Daniel by name at first. Then he said, "In recent months, this foundation has faced allegations connected to a journalist whose own professional conduct remains under serious review. We mourn his death, but grief cannot excuse misinformation." A few guests applauded. Annie remained still. Whitmore continued, "We must also protect vulnerable young people from those who would use personal tragedy to advance financial or political interests." His eyes moved toward Jonathan. Jonathan leaned closer to Annie. "He is giving you the argument before you answer it." "Good," she said. Now no one can pretend they didn't hear him. Whitmore finished to polite applause. The master of ceremonies returned. "Our final speaker is Mr. Jonathan Hale, founding donor and longtime partner of the Belhaven Renewal Foundation." Jonathan walked to the podium. Whitmore stopped him near the stage steps and whispered something Annie could not hear. Jonathan replied at normal volume, "You have had 6 months to tell the story of her father. Tonight, the stage belongs to Annie." The nearest microphones caught every word. Jonathan stepped behind the podium. I was scheduled to speak for 8 minutes. I have nothing to say that matters more than what you are about to hear. He looked toward Annie. Miss Brooks. The room turned. Annie stood and walked down the aisle. She could hear glasses being set on tables and chairs shifting behind her. She passed Tyler, who lowered his eyes. She passed Whitmore, who did not. At the podium, Annie removed Daniel's camera from her neck and placed it beside the microphone. The ballroom screen went black. Whitmore rose. This presentation has not been approved. Jonathan took his seat. That is the point. The first slide waited in darkness. Annie looked across the ballroom, past the donors and officials, toward the empty wall where her work had been removed 1 week earlier. Then she began, "My name is Annie Brooks. 6 months ago, this city called my father a liar. Tonight, I am going to show you what he actually saw." The first image appeared behind Annie, a row of homes in East Ward marked with red demolition notices. Beneath it, she had written the date, the address, and the name of the city inspector who signed the report. "This photograph was taken on March 14, Annie said. "The foundation's records describe these houses as uninhabitable. 3 were still occupied. 2 had passed independent safety inspections less than a month earlier." A murmur moved through the ballroom. Whitmore remained standing near the front table. "This is an unauthorized presentation of unverified material." Annie looked at him. "Then you should have no difficulty explaining it." The second image replaced the first. It showed new roofing material being unloaded from a foundation truck at the Mason Avenue warehouse. "The Bellhaven Renewal Foundation billed federal recovery funds for these supplies," she continued. "According to its reports, they were delivered to damaged homes in East Ward. My father photographed them being stored inside a warehouse owned by Harbor Crest Materials." The company name appeared beside the image, followed by its registered address and its connection to Whitmore Development. Several guests turned toward one another. A contractor at the third table lowered his glass without drinking. Whitmore stepped toward the stage. "Mr. Hale." "Stop this." Jonathan did not rise. "I am not controlling the presentation. That equipment belongs to your company. The facts do not." Annie advanced to the next frame. Martin Vale stood in a parking garage, handing a thick envelope to Commissioner Dalton. Dalton pushed back his chair. "This photograph proves nothing," he said. "Former officers meet with law enforcement all the time." "That is true," Annie replied. "A photograph should not be forced to prove more than it contains. This one proves that Martin Vale met with you on April 2 at 10:16 p.m. The foundation's records show that a payment of $40,000 was approved for a security consultant the following morning." Dalton's expression hardened. "Are you accusing me of taking a bribe?" "I am telling this room what the photograph shows and what the records show. Agent Alvarez can decide what questions follow." At the rear of the ballroom, Alvarez remained seated. Her face revealed nothing. The next images showed Whitmore seated with contractors around a property map. Then came the contract photographed beneath a desk lamp, with 2 different amounts visible on the same page. $486,000 was charged to the foundation, Annie said. The contractor's estimate was $191,000. The difference was transferred through companies with no listed employees and no active work sites. A man near the center aisle stood. He was in his 70s and wore a dark suit that did not fit across his shoulders. "My name is Calvin Reed," he said. "They told the government they repaired my roof." Whitmore turned toward him. "Sir, this is not an open forum." Calvin ignored him. "I slept under plastic for 8 months. Every time it rained, water ran down my bedroom wall." 2 tables behind him, an older woman rose. "They condemned my house after I refused to sell," she said. "My grandchildren were still living there." Another resident stood, then another. Their voices did not arrive in perfect order. One man spoke too softly for the microphone to catch him. A woman forgot a date and corrected herself. Someone near the stage asked them to sit down, but no one did. Annie waited. This was not disorder. It was what happened when people who had been reduced to figures on reports entered the room that had discussed them without permission. Whitmore looked toward the event staff. "Remove anyone disrupting the program." No one moved. The security guards near the doors had seen the state police outside. They had also seen the red recording light above the ballroom camera. The presentation was already streaming beyond Bellhaven. Annie advanced to frame 14. Martin stood beside Daniel's car behind the warehouse. The room quieted. Frame 15 showed him crouched near the rear wheel. "This image was taken hours before my father's crash," Annie said. "An independent federal examination has since found that the rear brake line was cut with a tool. The vehicle's crash data was erased after his death. A damaged part from another car was installed before the local police investigation was closed." Dalton moved toward the aisle. Alvarez stood. "Commissioner," she said, "remain in the room." Every camera turned toward him. "This is political theater," Dalton replied. "A grieving child is being used to attack public servants." Annie looked at him from the stage. "There it is," she said. Dalton stopped. "For 6 months, every time I asked for evidence, you called me emotional. When I questioned your report, you called me unstable. Tonight, when I show records, photographs, dates, and names, you still call me a child." No one spoke. "You believed my age made me easy to dismiss," Annie continued. "You believed my grief made me unreliable. And when that was not enough, people in this room repeated the oldest assumption they could find, that a young black woman could not have created her own work, understood her own evidence, or known when powerful men were lying to her." Whitmore's voice cut across the silence. "No one removed your photographs because of your race. You displayed a white photographer's images of my neighborhood while taking mine off the wall. His work passed review. My work contained evidence against you. That is an outrageous claim." Annie changed the slide. "Still here," filled the screen. The young black girl stood before the abandoned home, while luxury towers appeared in the broken window behind her. Near the edge of the reflection sat the white Harbor Crest truck. "This is the photograph your office specifically ordered removed," Annie said. "You said it created complications for a foundation property. You did not question its ownership until after someone recognized what was in the background." The girl in the photograph was now seated near the back of the ballroom beside her grandmother. Annie had invited them that afternoon after locating the family through Daniel's notes. The grandmother stood. "My name is Louise Carter," she said. "That is my granddaughter, Maya. The foundation used our street in fundraising brochures. Then they bought the houses around us and stopped collecting the trash." Whitmore's face tightened. "These individual complaints do not establish criminal conduct." "No," Annie said. "That is why there are 18 frames." She moved through the remaining images. Relocation papers signed under pressure. An inspector receiving an envelope. The black SUV waiting in the alley. Then following Daniel's car. The final photograph appeared. Daniel's reflection looked back from the warehouse window. The Leica was held against his chest. Behind him, the SUV waited. Annie's voice lowered. "My father knew he was being followed. He preserved what he saw because he understood that the truth would be attacked through him. So they called him corrupt. They removed his work. They taught the city to doubt the witness before anyone examined the evidence." She rested one hand beside the Leica on the podium. "My father was not perfect. He was stubborn. He believed he could protect people by keeping them uninformed. Sometimes he mistook carrying danger alone for courage, but he did not fabricate these photographs." Evelyn rose from the front row. "I edited Daniel Brooks for 23 years, she said. "I reviewed his negatives, his notes, and his corrections. The film displayed tonight is continuous and unaltered. I will testify to that, under oath." Whitmore looked toward Dalton, but Dalton was now watching Alvarez. Annie turned to the rear of the room. Rachel Kim stood beside her chair. Her hands trembled, but she stepped into the aisle. "My name is Rachel Kim," she said. "I removed Annie Brooks's photographs from the exhibition." The ballroom shifted toward her. Rachel walked forward one step at a time. "I did it because Charles Whitmore ordered me to," she continued. "And I have the email that proves it." Rachel stopped several feet from the stage. Every face in the ballroom had turned toward her, but she looked only at Annie. "I received the first order at 2:13 on the afternoon of the gala," she said. "It came from the Foundation's executive office. The message instructed me to remove all 3 photographs submitted by Annie Brooks." Whitmore stepped away from his table. "Miss Kim was dismissed for violating Foundation policy. Anything she says should be understood in that context." Rachel's shoulders tightened, but she continued. "The first message referred to ownership concerns. A second email arrived 11 minutes later. That one named 'Still Here' and said the frame had to be secured before Martin Vale reached the hotel. "Do you possess the original email?" Agent Alvarez asked. "Yes, I forwarded it to a private account and printed a copy before my access was terminated." "Who signed the message?" Rachel turned toward Whitmore. "Charles Whitmore." A wave of voices rose from the tables. Whitmore lifted one hand as if calming a board meeting. "This is absurd. My office sends hundreds of communications under my name. I did not write that message. You called my supervisor 3 minutes after it arrived," Rachel said. "You told her the Brooks photographs were a threat to the foundation." "I do not recall that conversation. I recorded it." The ballroom fell silent again. Whitmore's expression did not change at once. Then his eyes narrowed. Rachel removed her phone from her purse but did not unlock it. "I gave the original file to the FBI this afternoon. They verified the time and the number that called me." Alvarez spoke from the aisle. "That recording is now federal evidence." Whitmore looked toward the ballroom doors. 2 agents had moved into place beside them without drawing attention. Rachel continued. "I removed the photographs because I was afraid of losing my job and my father's health insurance. When I opened the back of Still Here, I found an archival envelope marked 18. Martin arrived less than 20 minutes later and asked whether the frame's backing had been disturbed." "What did you tell him?" Annie asked. "That there was nothing inside." "And was that true?" "No. I had already removed the envelope." Rachel faced the guests. "I did one right thing after doing several wrong ones. That does not erase what I allowed to happen. I watched Annie sit alone beside the emergency exit. I knew her work had been removed under a false excuse, and I said nothing because silence seemed safer." Her voice shook, but she did not lower it. "It was safer for me. It was not safer for her." A woman at one of the donor tables looked down at her plate. Whitmore gave a short laugh. "You expect this room to accept the testimony of a frightened employee who admits she stole foundation property?" "The frame belonged to me," Annie said. "The exhibition materials were under foundation control. The negatives belonged to Daniel Brooks," Alvarez replied. "Your claim over them will be examined with the rest of your records." Dalton stood. "This event is finished." He took one step toward the side aisle. 2 federal agents entered through the rear doors. Alvarez faced him. "Commissioner Frank Dalton, remain where you are. You have no authority to detain me without cause." One of the agents handed Alvarez a document. She checked the first page before looking up. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges including obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law." Dalton's face reddened. "Based on the performance of an 18-year-old girl?" "No," Alvarez said. "Based on bank records, vehicle evidence, access logs, witness statements, and communications recovered before tonight began." She turned toward Whitmore. A second agent moved to his side. "Charles Whitmore, we also have a warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy, federal program fraud, wire fraud, witness intimidation, and obstruction." Whitmore looked toward Jonathan. "You arranged this." Jonathan remained seated. "No, you did. This foundation has attorneys. You will need them." The agent reached for Whitmore's wrist. He pulled his arm away. "Do you know how many people in this city depend on me?" he demanded. "Jobs, housing, hospital grants. None of it survives without men willing to make difficult decisions." Calvin Reed answered from the center aisle. "My roof didn't survive with you." A few people laughed, but it was not amusement. It was the release of something held too long. Whitmore scanned the room for support. Board members who had praised him an hour earlier avoided his eyes. The mayor stepped away from the front table. Tyler Grant stood near the stage holding his award against his chest, looking younger than he had when the evening began. The agent secured Whitmore's hands behind him. Dalton did not resist when another agent approached, but he looked at Annie as the cuffs closed around his wrists. "You think this clears your father?" he said. "People will remember the accusations." Annie met his stare. "Then I'll make sure they also remember who created them." As the agents led the 2 men toward the doors, reporters crowded the aisle. Questions struck the room from every direction. "Commissioner, did you authorize Martin Vale's access to the evidence garage?" "Mr. Whitmore, where did the missing federal funds go?" "Miss Brooks, did Jonathan Hale finance this investigation?" Alvarez raised her voice. "No interviews until the evidence is secured. Anyone possessing foundation, financial records, communications, or property reports should remain available." Evelyn approached the stage carrying a sealed copy of the contact sheet. Alvarez allowed her to stand beside Annie. My name is Evelyn Grant, she said into the microphone. I served as Daniel Brooks's editor at the Belhaven Chronicle for 23 years. I examined the original negative strips in the presence of federal technicians. The edge markings are continuous. The sequence is intact. There is no sign that any frame was inserted, removed, or altered. A reporter called from the aisle. Can you guarantee Brooks never fabricated evidence in another investigation? No honest editor guarantees a journalist's entire life with one sentence, Evelyn replied. I can tell you that Daniel corrected errors when he found them, withdrew a major investigation when one source proved unreliable, and preserved the records behind his reporting. That is more accountability than the people who accused him have shown tonight. Annie looked at the final image of her father still displayed behind her. The ballroom was no longer arranged into powerful people at the front and grateful residents at the back. Guests had left their seats. East Ward families stood in the aisles beside donors, reporters, hotel workers, and federal agents. For once, the people discussed in the Foundation's reports were present when those reports were challenged. Annie returned to the microphone. My father did not finish his last article, she said. He left notes, photographs, names, and questions. He began with residents whose grants disappeared and whose homes were condemned after they refused to sell. She lifted Daniel's unfinished pages. He wrote about Calvin Reed, who was promised a roof. He wrote about Louise Carter and her granddaughter Maya, whose street was used in fundraising advertisements while basic services were withdrawn. He wrote about families treated as obstacles because someone else wanted the land beneath their homes. Whitmore had tried to reduce the investigation to stolen money. Daniel had understood that the money was only the method. The real crime was deciding that some people could be removed without consequence. Annie looked into the nearest camera. My father's final story was not about powerful men. It was about the people they believed no one would listen to. She placed the pages beside the Leica. Tonight, we listened. The screen behind her returned to the first photograph, the East Ward houses marked for demolition. This time, no one in the ballroom looked away. 9 months after the gala, the United States District Court in Belhaven filled before sunrise. East Ward residents occupied 2 rows behind the prosecution. Reporters lined the hallway, and camera crews waited outside beneath umbrellas. Annie entered through the main doors with Evelyn beside her and Daniel's Leica resting against her coat. Charles Whitmore had agreed to stand trial rather than accept a plea. His lawyers argued that the Foundation's financial irregularities came from careless administrators, that Rachel Kim had stolen documents, and that Jonathan Hale had used Annie to eliminate a business rival. They called Daniel's photographs incomplete and suggested that grief had shaped Annie's interpretation of them. The jury saw more than photographs. Federal accountants traced millions of dollars from recovery grants into shell companies controlled by Whitmore's partners. Contractors testified that they had been ordered to inflate invoices. City inspectors admitted that Dalton's office pressured them to condemn repairable homes. Digital specialists recovered deleted messages between Whitmore, Martin Vale, and Dalton. One message from Whitmore to Martin had been sent 6 hours before Daniel's crash. Brooks has the pictures. End this tonight. Martin pleaded guilty before the trial began. In exchange for avoiding a life sentence, he described cutting Daniel's brake line, following him from the warehouse, and helping Dalton replace vehicle parts inside the police garage. He claimed he had intended only to frighten Daniel into surrendering the film. The prosecutor asked him one question. What did you believe would happen when a car with severed brakes reached the Mason Avenue curve? Martin looked toward the table. I knew what could happen. Rachel testified for 2 days. She explained how Whitmore's office ordered Annie's photographs removed, how Martin asked about the frame, and how fear for her father's medical care kept her silent. The defense tried to portray her as a resentful employee. You stole Foundation property, correct? Whitmore's attorney asked. I preserved evidence someone else was trying to steal. That was not my question. No, Rachel said. It was the answer. Evelyn verified Daniel's working methods, notebooks, and film catalog. Jonathan turned over his company's records and admitted publicly that his money had helped the Foundation appear trustworthy. When Annie testified, Whitmore's attorney approached her with the careful patience adults sometimes used when they expected a young person to lose control. You loved your father very much. Yes. You wanted to restore his reputation. I wanted the evidence examined. And you were angry. Yes. Anger can affect judgment, can it not? So can profit. The attorney paused. Annie continued before he could interrupt. That is why I did not ask anyone to trust my feelings. I gave the FBI the original negatives, the frame, the messages, and the records. Experts examined them. Witnesses confirmed them. My anger is not evidence, and neither is your client's confidence. A few jurors looked toward Whitmore. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 11 hours. Whitmore was convicted of conspiracy, federal program fraud, wire fraud, obstruction, witness intimidation, and involvement in Daniel's murder. Dalton was convicted in a separate proceeding of obstruction, evidence tampering, civil rights violations, and conspiracy. Martin received a reduced sentence because of his cooperation, though the judge reminded him that cooperation did not transform calculation into remorse. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Annie. Do you feel justice has been served? She looked toward Calvin Reed, Louise Carter, Rachel, Evelyn, and the families who had spent years being treated as lines on property maps. Justice is not one verdict, she said. It is what happens after the cameras leave. The Belhaven Chronicle published Daniel's unfinished investigation across 6 consecutive Sundays. On the first page, beneath the headline, the editors printed a statement admitting that the newspaper had removed his work without independently verifying the accusations against him. 2 senior executives resigned. The paper restored Daniel's archive, published the evidence used to discredit him, and returned the journalism awards it had quietly withdrawn after his death. Annie read the apology once. Then she folded the newspaper and placed it in Daniel's old archive box. She did not frame it. Federal courts froze Whitmore's development companies and redirected recovered funds toward home repairs, rent support, and legal aid for displaced East Ward families. The city created an independent board to review condemned properties. It was imperfect, slow, and argued over at every meeting, but Calvin finally received a new roof. Louise Carter's block regained trash collection, and the demolition order on her house was canceled. 1 year after the gala, Annie stood outside the renovated Mason Avenue warehouse. The broken windows had been replaced, though she insisted that one damaged frame remain visible near the entrance. Above the front doors, simple black letters read, "The Daniel Brooks Gallery and Youth Photography Lab." Jonathan had offered to pay for the renovation on 3 conditions of his own. The building would belong to a neighborhood trust. Classes would remain free, and his name would appear nowhere on it. Annie accepted after adding a 4th. "You don't choose what we exhibit." Jonathan had smiled. I assumed that was already clear. Inside, Daniel's contact sheets occupied one wall beside photographs created by students from East Ward. Rachel managed the gallery archive while caring for her father, whose cancer was now in remission. Evelyn taught a monthly class called How to Question a Photograph and rejected every suggestion that the title sounded severe. "It is severe," she said. "That is why it works." At the opening reception, Annie's photograph, still here, hung at the center of the main room. Beneath it was a smaller image taken 1 year later. Maya stood before the same house, but the trash had been cleared, the porch repaired, and her grandmother sat beside her beneath a new porch light. Jonathan found Annie near the emergency exit, where she was adjusting a student's crooked print. "You still choose interesting places to stand," he said. "This one has good light." Music began near the entrance. A local jazz trio had donated its time. Jonathan extended his hand. "May I have this dance?" Annie looked at him. "You still haven't improved?" "Not enough to create false expectations." She accepted, and they walked toward the center of the gallery. There was no whispering crowd waiting to decide what the gesture meant. Evelyn shook her head at Jonathan's footwork. Rachel laughed. Calvin Reed clapped out of rhythm. After one slow turn, Annie stepped away. "I have a class." "Of course you do." She left him among the guests and entered the darkroom at the rear of the building. 8 students waited beneath the red safety light, each holding a strip of film. Annie placed Daniel's Leica on the counter where everyone could see it. "Before we make a print," she said, "tell me what the frame actually contains. Not what you hope it proves. Not what someone powerful tells you it means. Only what you can see." A 12-year-old boy raised his hand and began describing the first image. Annie listened. Outside, the gallery carried her father's name. Inside the red light, she was teaching the next person how to protect the truth. This story reminds us that injustice survives when good people remain silent. Truth may be ignored, distorted, or buried by those with power, but evidence, courage, and the willingness to speak can bring it back into the light. Annie's journey shows that justice is not achieved by one heroic person alone. It requires witnesses, honest institutions, and ordinary people who refuse to look away. Real courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to defend the truth even when doing so carries a personal cost. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.